Assalamu alaikum. Welcome back to the Ramadan series, A Beautiful Patience, where we're going to derive the lessons from Surah Yousef alayhi salam. And we're going to start with the first lesson, which is finding comfort in revelation. Surah Yousef is a chapter that was undoubtedly a means of consolation for the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, especially during the hardest periods of his life. It was in the 10th year, which was post-revelation. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was undergoing some of the greatest trials that he had ever experienced since even becoming a prophet of Allah. And this year was so strenuous on him, very difficult on him, that it actually became titled Am al-Huzn, which is the year of sorrow. And during this time, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he endured two huge losses, the biggest losses to him, which was the passing of his beloved wife, his friend, his backbone, Khadija radiallahu anha, and the death of his uncle, which was also a father figure to him. And this was actually, their passing was only about a month or two in between. So anyone out there that has experienced the death of a loved one understands this type of heartache and understands the brokenness that the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ must have felt. But the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was definitely heartbroken by both losses, because both losses represented that he has now lost the internal support and the external support that he had. Surah Yousef was pivotal, and it was important for him to reflect on these circumstances. And that's why finding comfort in revelation is very important. When we look at the purpose in the Quran for stories, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us stories of people of the past, generations prior to the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, we want to look at why is it so important to turn to the Quran and read the Quran and have the Quran be a part of every aspect of our life. It is because one of the purposes that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala shares stories with us in the Quran, it is to establish and teach hikmah, wisdom. And wisdom is really putting everything in its proper place and time. Another example or purpose that we should return and turn to the Quran, it shows the greatness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's justice. It's a common theme that in the stories and throughout all trials and tribulations, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is always with the believers. He's always with the oppressed. He's always with the patient. Another purpose of the Quranic stories is to give glad tidings to those who are grateful. And these tidings are to help us remain strong and be strong throughout our vulnerabilities or our weaknesses. And it's to console the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. It is to help us increase our faith and strengthen our faith in the faith of the believers. It is to also warn the disbelievers and to strengthen the message of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. So when we look at the aspect of consoling the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, this revelation of this particular story came to the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ in the year of sorrow, when he was experiencing these very difficult hardships that were breaking him and making him feel very vulnerable. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted to comfort him, so he revealed the story of Yousef alayhi salam. And when we look at the tafsir of the Quran, there are chapters throughout the Quran that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala comforts the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And one of them is the story of Yousef alayhi salam. So our Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he was no stranger to having adverse conditions in his life. He experienced so many trials, and in fact, he was one of the most tested individuals that ever walked on this earth. In fact, he was raised as an orphan due to his father Abdullah passing months before he was born. And then, short after that, he lost his mother, Amina, at the tender age of 6, as he just began to create fond memories with her. Then, short even after that, he lost his esteemed grandfather, Abd al-Muttalib, where it was reported that he wept so much over the loss of his grandfather where he had vivid memories of. And this shaped the Prophet Muhammad's outlook on life in a very early age of his life, where he's been tested and tested over and over again, teaching him that there were no guarantees in this temporary world, and that all of it has been decreed by Allah Himself. So through Surah Yousef, it covers a variety of different themes, and at its heart and essence lies the beauty of patience. Patience is unique. A lot of us say we're patient, but are we truly patient in our heart? Are we truly patient uttering it on our tongue? And are we truly patient acting that patience out? So it's important that when we're going through difficulty and hardships, that we are patient, persevering through it, turning to Allah, seeking His help and His guidance all the way through. So by exploring the life of Prophet Yousef alayhi salam throughout his whole chapter, our beloved Prophet Muhammad is given the opportunity to see despite all these different hardships that he faced, he's seen Yousef alayhi salam steadfast. He's seen Yousef alayhi salam patient, persevering through every trial and tribulation that he faced that was weighed very heavy on him. And as mentioned, the Prophet Muhammad required assistance from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala after experiencing the most difficult years on his mission and his entire life. So he eventually found comfort through the revelation. And that comfort can also be given to us. It is not only pertaining to the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. So when we approach the Quran, we should approach it with an open mind and an open heart, turning to it for guidance, turning to it for its nur, turning to it to receive the glad tidings of it, and being fearful of the warning of it, and making sure as it comforted the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ that it would comfort us too. So if the most beloved creation of God, if the most beloved creation of Allah, the prophets, were tested, then where does that leave us? That means we are going to be tested as well. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says we will all be tested, as subhanallah, Allah created us to worship Him, and He put us in this temporary dunya to be tested, as the dunya is called the Dar al-Ibtila'at, the home of trials. So the Prophet Muhammad confirmed that it would be the most beloved to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who would experience the greatest of tests, then the next degree of those closest to them, and so on. So if you're facing a hardship, embrace it, turning to Allah and asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the one who brought it to you, to give you strength to go through it. It is said that some of the most righteous individuals of the past would get worried when they would not be even tested. So now people don't want to be tested whatsoever. But yet a long time ago, people used to question if they weren't being tested. Now this is not by no means something that tells us to ask for trials and to ask for hardships. We should never ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for hardships. But when we do in fact experience them, we are definitely patient, knowing that it would not come to us without the permission of Allah. So that means Allah will not give us what we can't handle. So we have to turn to Allah, and we have to find comfort in the Quran. So remember that the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said, and he found solace through the revelation of the Quran. And we too can find comfort in knowing that we have a promised relief after hardship. Please stay tuned and continue to follow Shaded on the Day of Judgment for more lessons derived from the story of Yousef alayhi salam. Jazakumullah kull khair, and thank you for your time, and I hope that you have a blessed day.